Hi there, and welcome back to Building Your Leader Brand. My name is Bob Gentle, and every week I speak with incredible people who share their secrets to building, marketing, and monetizing their expertise and the mindset you need for your business to grow and thrive. If you're new to the show, then whichever device you have in your hand, take a moment to subscribe. If you're on Apple Podcasts, it's the plus icon. Spotify, I'm pretty sure it's straightforward subscribe. On YouTube, I honestly can't remember. I think it's subscribe. Yes. So, this week, we're probably talking about the holy grail of most business owners, which is actually getting things done. And to help me with this, to guide me through the world of productivity, I am thrilled to welcome Grace Marshall. Grace, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
I am looking forward to this today because actually getting things done is the hardest. I think if you're an ambitious person, it's very easy to come up with lots of ideas, lots of projects, and be on top of it for a while. And then overwhelm rolls over the top of you and everything falls apart. And I would like some help through that, Grace. And I'm sure everybody listening would like some help with that. But before I get too excited and carried away, as I always do, I'll invite you to maybe tell us a little bit about who you are, where you are, and what it is you actually do.
Okay, so my name's Grace Marshall. I am officially a productivity ninja. I'm also chief encourager, speaker, author. So what I do is I help people think about the way they work and help them to find ways of doing their best work, have fun doing it, and have a life outside of work as well. So for me, productivity isn't about how do we squeeze more in, but actually what do you want to make space for, and how do you get the best out of yourself as well as your time.
So where's the best place to begin? You've written a few books. I think for the listener, let's maybe roll through those because they're a wonderful resource. And we're probably going to talk about things that come out in those books as we go through this conversation. So maybe let's begin there and then we can move on from there.
Sure. So my first book came out in 2012 and that was called 21 Ways to Manage the Stuff That Sucks Up Your Time. It's a tiny little book. It was affectionately called by one of my very good friends. She called it a toilet book. So the kind of book that you could pick up while you're on the loo and pick something out of it, find something useful in 2 minutes and go and implement. And it was very much written in a time when I was growing my own coaching business alongside raising a family. So I've got two teenagers as they are now. They're 16 and 19. But my business is like my middle child. So at the time I was growing a business, had 2 young children, and very much resisted actually going into the niche of productivity and time management. Because one thing about me is that I'm naturally disorganized. So I wouldn't have seen like time management as my thing. And yet people I was coaching, people I met kept asking me, how do you do it, Grace? How do we do it? How do we fit in this thing that we want to grow and alongside all of our life commitments? And also, how do I get stuff done when I don't have a conventional 9-to-5 job and offices with doors that close and a PA and someone else to make everything happen? Like, how do we fit it in between things like nap times and school runs and the boiler breaking down and things like that? So that's really how that book came about. And it's very much a short tips book that helps you to kind of find ways to, as it says, manage the stuff that sucks up your time. Book number 2 came out 3 years later, 2015, and that's called How to Be Really Productive. And in fact, the first chapter of that book is why it's not just about getting things done, why productivity isn't just about getting things done. And I talk about it also being about purpose and meaning and joy. So really it was digging into actually what I'm noticing a lot of the conversation these days going into. So avoiding things like toxic productivity, questioning if we're holding productivity as a bit of a badge of honor, that actually what does it look like to have have time when you're not being productive, and what if that's a good thing? A lot of that stuff I was talking about in this book. It was about kind of doing work in a way that does you good, as well as the good that you're doing out there in the world. And then my third book came out in 2021. And that's called Struggle, the Surprising Truth, Beauty, and Opportunity Hidden in Life's Shittier Moments. And that book actually came out of conversations I was having with people who had been through the productivity journey, who felt like they had a good handle on all of that stuff. So they were like, I'm getting my inbox to zero. I'm dealing with things well. I've got my systems in place. I feel really organized, and yet I'm still struggling. Help. And when I had those conversations with them, what I realized was we tend to see struggle as this obstacle that gets in the way. So it's either something we're trying to avoid or something we're trying to fix, get over, get rid of. And yet, as a coach, when I'm talking to people through their struggles, I'm thinking, hang on, there's more to this than just an obstacle we're trying to get rid of. There's a lot of wisdom here. There's a lot of growth here. There's some really interesting ideas that you wouldn't have even considered if things were going plain sailing. And so the premise of the book is, what if struggle isn't a battle to fight or a trap to avoid? What if it's actually the birthplace of some of our best, most important work?
I love that. And I think that really resonates for me because the opposite of struggle is ease.
Mm.
And what good things happen in ease? What growth happens in ease? Absolutely none is the answer to that.
Mm.
And as you were speaking, I was thinking about comparison,
Mm.
that everybody I know considers themselves as unproductive. I've never met anybody who will say, I'm incredibly productive. I don't have an issue. It's a relative thing that I compare myself to the me of 25, and I'm a machine.
Mm.
But I compare myself to my own aspirations, and I'm just a puddle of mess. And I think everybody could probably identify this. So I think there's an area of this where you need to be nice to yourself.
Mm.
However, everybody's looking for improvement
Mhm.
in many different aspects of their life. Um, but I do like the idea of the acceptance of struggle. I think that's so important, the acceptance and embracing that
Mm.
struggle, because if we don't have that, we don't have growth, we don't have evolution, we don't have change, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really interesting because I think when we are compassionate with ourselves, we can actually start to look at whatever it is that we're dealing with more with more thought and more care and more curiosity. And that is likely to give us some better solutions and better answers for improvement than looking at it with a sense of comparison or shame or guilt or blame. That's one thing I talk about in Struggle a lot, is the difference between fear and curiosity. Fear puts us in a mode where we're trying to get away from the struggle. Curiosity goes, oh, let's take a closer look. What's actually going on here?
So hopefully the listener can embrace struggle, can identify, yes, it's important to not avoid difficulty. But there will be people screaming at me saying, Bob, please ask, what does a healthy, productive workflow look like? What are the basic principles of productivity according to Grace? There's many ways of approaching. There's lots of books. You could walk into a bookshop, throw a stone, and you'll hit a productivity book.
Mm.
Um, what's your perspective on this, and how people should maybe approach their workday and their mindset around that differently?
Yeah. I think there is something really powerful in defining success on your own terms. So, to pick up on what you were saying earlier, when you were comparing the you now compared to you before, that was really interesting because I was in conversation with someone the other day when I said, compared to the me that wrote that first book, what my day looks like is very different. And arguably, the me 12 years ago was a lot more efficient. I was able to kind of tick a whole load of things off. I was working really fast. I was moving from one thing to another. And that was a particular season when that served me really, really well. It was also a different season and age that I was in as well. Whereas now, actually, what a productive day looks like for me is making sure I have space for the deep thinking, for the creative work, for taking a step back and thoughtfully considering and making those decisions that I need to make, rather than how quickly can I get things done. And I think there's room and scope for both of those things. And and it will be a sliding scale and it'll change from day to day. But I think it's worth, for some people, broadening our definition of productivity. So rather than thinking of it as how many things can I tick off the list, maybe it's about what kind of space do I want to, what kind of thinking do I want to make space for? What kind of mode do I want to, what kind of work do I want to make space for? And some days it will very much absolutely be, how do I tick my way through this list? How do I get these things done and executed and get it off my plate? And those are the days where the principles of getting it out of your head, doing the thinking first, so going thinking first, then doing, that's really useful. Managing your attention, making sure you're distraction free, all of those kind of things, really, really helpful to get through. And then obviously making sure the things on your list are small enough that they're actually doable. So if you've got website on your to-do list, that ain't an action. So making sure you're really breaking it down and going, what actual thing do I need to be doing? Use a verb, get it really practical. And that helps you to get into that execution mode where you're just going, okay, I need to email this thing. I need to write, brainstorm 3 bullet points. I need to click send on that email or whatever it is. So getting really granular, really defined. That's what works really well when you're in that mode. But I think, if success to you looks like, well, actually, I'm already really good at delivering most things, but actually it's certain things that I never get around to doing. And that might be the non-client facing work. It might be the slightly more nebulous stuff where I don't know the answers. And I don't know about you, Bob, but I think having done this for quite a while now, I think for those of us whose profession or business is about delivering expertise, there's something highly satisfying and very seductive about being in that expert mode where it's like, I know what I'm doing. I can do it really well. I can deliver it, and people like me when I do that. And in contrast, in contrast, there's the other stuff where it's like, I don't know how to do this. I'm not sure about that. It's going to take me forever to try and draft that thing because I'm wrestling with it. I'm wrangling with it. And in contrast, sometimes that can feel like incompetence, or it can feel like, well, this is clearly the wrong thing for me to do. I'm being unproductive. I'm stuck here. I want to go and do something where I can tick it off and celebrate. And again, that is about refining or defining your what good work looks like. So sometimes it feels like this is the thing that's getting in the way of my work. But what if this is the work? Actually, this kind of wrangling, this piece of struggle, that's the work that really matters here. That's the work that's going to change the game. That's the work that's going to allow me to break new ground.
I think as you're listening, I'm thinking of two different Bobs. There's my natural inclination to, I can hold big, complex plans in my head, and they're wonderful. And I think a lot of people can identify with that. But actually, it's entirely non-essential. I think most of the time, simplification is the route to success. And it's something I've come across. I've been dealing with business owners for 30 years. And something I've found is that the most successful people I know are successful because they simplify, not because they added complexity. The wealthiest people, they do one thing for one person and they do it really, really well. And newer business owners hedge, I think. They think, well, I need to do webinars. I need a membership. I need to do email marketing. I need to be doing TikTok. I should have a YouTube channel and a podcast, and I should be speaking, and I need a book, and on and on and on and on. And yes, all of those things are lovely. But if you do all of them half-assed and you never finish anything, you may as well have done nothing. Whereas you could put in a fraction of the work and finish one thing, really leverage it. And that will unlock so much more. And it would have been a lot less resistance. And I think this is something that I can kind of see in your own trajectory. And I think it's a nice pivot to maybe look at what did your own personal brand business trajectory look like? Because I'm sure there was bits of that in the beginning where you tried to spin all the plates. Perhaps not you, but I'm interested to know how a productivity focused person goes about this
Mm.
chaos that is building a business online.
Yeah. Oh, I totally, started off going, I can do all the things. I started my business as a coach. And in terms of my coaching training, I was very much, I can coach anybody on anything. And that's true. I can. Terrible marketing advice. So, me trying to coach everybody on anything, just spread myself thin. I was trying lots of different things. And I think there is something about, what can I try and see? Um, because if you had met me 20 years ago and told me that I the bulk of what I do now would be public speaking, I wouldn't have believed you. That wasn't who I was back then. Speaking is very much, I always say I became an accidental speaker. Um, and then found that I both loved it and I'm good at it. So then I sort of, developed it more. But and again, I wouldn't have picked time management or productivity as my thing either. So there is something about giving yourself permission to try things, but then also permission to quit, and to choose, and to pick on what's going to work for you. So in terms of marketing channels, I started off writing because that was my go-to, that was my comfort zone, but also because I had young children and going to events was a really hard thing for me to do. So blogging was something that fitted in with my lifestyle and my life commitments. So that's kind of how I started. And then drilling down into, okay, if I could coach anybody on anything, who am I actually coaching? So who's within my orbit? Who is engaging with me? Who are the people who are coming to me, and what do they have in common? So for a while, it was very much people who were juggling business and family. So that became my niche. I toyed with a few different ideas. So we looked at, I think at one point I was specializing in burnout and recovering from that. But I remember somebody saying, look, who are your people? Who are you serving? What is their number one challenge? And I was like, oh, damn it, it's time. Like the thing that I was resisting, that was the number one challenge. So I just got to a point where I was like, okay, Grace, even if you don't feel qualified, just start answering the question. Like if somebody was asking you this question, what would you say? How might you start answering that question? And so I started leaning into that field, not positioning myself as an expert, but just going, okay, could I run, back in those days, it was a teleseminar. Could I run a teleseminar on the topic? What could I say about that? What could I write about that? And kind of started to build this repertoire, this portfolio on, from there. And then from there, what I noticed was people started giving me feedback. So I noticed what was resonating. And funnily enough, what was resonating wasn't the things I was expert at doing, it was how well I could describe how much I was struggling with it. So I remember somebody reading the first few pages of 21 Ways, and they were like, "Have you been in my head? This is exactly how I feel. This is exactly what a day looks like for me." And it turns out there was something very refreshing and relatable about someone who's disorganized talking about how do you do this thing of productivity. So that actually became my niche. My what I thought was my weakness became my strength, and it became my unique selling point. Yeah, go.
Well, it's really interesting listening to that. The picture that kept coming to mind, I don't know if you've read it, but the book The Alchemist,
Mm.
um, that people can approach a niche in one of two ways. There's probably the most common way, which is sort of trying to discover what it is.
Mm.
And there's another way, which is actually letting it just rise up in front of you, which is your approach. It's one that I recognize a lot. It's more your niche comes to you
Mm.
through your process of discovery and testing and adjusting. It's a creative process. It's a little bit like sculpture, where you begin with a big rock and you think, well, wonder what's inside. You start chipping away, and the sculpture comes to life.
Yeah.
Whereas other people will sit and work out, well, what could I sculpt for a long, long time?
Mm.
And then they get nowhere.
Yeah.
Um,
I love that. And that actually is a really good summary of then what happened next as well, because I when that book came out, when the first book came out, I had just started chatting to somebody on Twitter, and that person was Graham Alcott, who wrote the book How to Be a Productivity Ninja. And we were, I often sort of joke that I was stalking him on Twitter. We got chatting. We found that we had a very similar approach to productivity. He was actually on my Brave list to ask for endorsements. And he got in touch with me first and asked me if I would review the book. So we kind of did a book swap, manuscript swap. And then we had a conversation afterwards. And he was like, hey, listen, next time I'm in the area, in the Midlands, shall we just grab a coffee, and get to know each other better? And we did. And the upshot of that was he was, at the time, he'd just started up Think Productive. It was very much an organization that was going in, running workshops in companies, corporates, charities, universities, doing the sort of more corporate workshop type model, if you like. And I wasn't doing any of that. I was doing one-to-one coaching, maybe some small group coaching. And he said, do you want to come on board? Do you want to be one of the ninjas? And that added a string to my bow. I didn't, I hadn't done corporate work up until that point, and I hadn't really done workshops. But it allowed me to develop into that and to bring my productivity expertise and my coaching experience into that space, and to then develop in that side of things. And then, from there came this speaking. And now, a lot of what I do is keynote speaking. And when I started working with Graham, a really interesting thing happened in that a lot of my entrepreneurial business buddies started saying, oh, are you working for Graham now? Or are you still working for Graham, or are you doing your own thing again? And I thought, that's interesting. And it took a little bit of getting used to. And I suppose what that revealed was, we have even those of us who were like, we've left like the corporate rat race, we're doing our own thing, this is all about freedom, we can still get stuck into that narrow vision of what success looks like. And with hindsight, I'd say what success looks like for me is very much connection and collaboration. That's when I'm at my best. It's not me being the sort of star of the show, or the creator, the genius, like coming up with everything. My brand of success is when I am collaborating with people and working in collaboration. That's when I do my best work. And that's what's allowed me to go into the corporate spaces, what's then springboarded me into keynote speaking. None of that would have happened if I'd have stuck with, this is my job, I'm the boss, this is all I'm going to be doing.
I totally get that. And I think working alongside other people can often look like working for them. And I guess this is a branding positioning piece. People will judge us by the stories we tell. And it simply echoes that perhaps we need to be a little more intentional about telling our story and not letting our brand happen to us, which is what happens for most people.
Yeah.
A lot of people would probably like me to, because I know for a lot of my clients, speaking is on the radar. And you talked about moving into public speaking as though the public speaking fairy just came and waved the magic wand and bestowed speakerhood upon you. It can't possibly have been that straightforward.
No, it wasn't. I suppose it started with opportunity. So it started with clients for whom I'd done full day workshops and kind of really practical workshops, then going, Grace, we've got this team away day coming up. Could you do something bite-sized for us? Could you do a shorter session? And then from there, it was like, okay, but this is pretty much a keynote, and kind of built it from there. So again, I used to joke that I could do Graham's keynote better than I can do my own, because if you probably, if you like 5-6 years ago, if you booked me for a keynote, it would be the Productivity Ninja keynote, and I still do them sometimes, and I love it. It's great. I bring my own, obviously, bring my own personality, bring my own stories into it. um, and it's something, again, it's something I do well, and I enjoy doing. But what that gave me was opportunity to practice, and the opportunity to then go, is this one of my strengths? And one of my friends, Marianne Cantwell, she talks about strengths as the things that strengthen us. So, yes, I do this well, and it gives me life, it gives me energy. I think I'd like to do more of it. And so when Struggle came out, that gave me the opportunity then to go, I could create my own keynote here. There is a topic here that isn't productivity related, in this sort of strict sense of things. And there's an opportunity here for me to tell my own stories, in a much more intentional way. So then I went down the journey of creating that keynote and delivering that more out there. And then I worked with a speaker coach to refine and hone that particular keynote. And she suggested to me, she was actually on the panel of judges for the Speaker Awards on, I think, the first year that they ran it. And she said, Grace, I think it'll be a really good exercise for you to enter. Just part of entering is you have to curate your own 5 minute, not quite a show reel, but like an example from one gig where you kind of show yourself, like 5 minute showcase. And she said, just doing that would be a really good exercise for you to do. So I did, and sent it off, delighted to be shortlisted. Even more excited that one of my, I call her my business crush, somebody who is a very experienced speaker, who I admire a lot. She said, "Oh, we're both shortlisted. I'm getting a table. Do you want to sit with me?" And I was like, "Yeah." So, I had no further expectations. But that year, I actually won Virtual Speaker of the Year. So I won one of the categories.
Wow.
And that really kind of shook me. It shook me up a bit. Kind of this thing that I'm doing accidentally, actually, maybe it's something that I can clearly be stepping into, that I am good at doing. So, funnily enough, the last couple of years since winning that award, I've probably been in more of a student mode of going, how do I do this thing called speaking? How do I do that really well, rather than accidentally doing it?
I think that sounds very validating. I mean, winning anything is very validating. Compliments are always validating when they come from people you respect. So it does sound like all signs were pointing in the direction of speaking. With that being, as you identified earlier on, a core part of the business now, most people, they don't become successful in what they're selling by accident. I mean, there are some outliers, but in order for this to be a business, we need to have a sales process. What does that look like for you now?
So for me now, again, bringing back to what I'm really good at is connection and collaboration. So what I try to do is I weave that into every part of my process. So including my sales process. So I have an agent who sometimes does the negotiation, but I always have that conversation first, because that connection is really important to me. So when somebody gets in touch, or if they've been referred, or whatever it is, the first port of call for me is, let's have a conversation. Let's find out what's going on for you and how we might be able to help. And I do that for all strands of my business. So for coaching, for workshops, for speaking. And sometimes I have those conversations and it's like, actually, I'm not the right person for you. But my priority is still connection. So I'm then going, who can I connect you to? Where can I signpost you to help? So for me, that conversation, when I have connection in mind, it's not about selling and it's not about pitching. It's about, how do I connect the dots between you and what's important to you, and where you want to be. So yeah, that's kind of at the heart of my sales process, really. And then I try and build that in as we go through. So then it's about discovery, building out that keynote, connecting with the audience, getting them connecting with each other. So when I speak, it's not just about hearing me talk. I mean, there are some gigs, like you've got 20 minutes, it's like TED style talking, go. And it's like, okay, that's fine. Whereas other times we've got more time, what I love to do is bringing conversation between people, because then we're creating a new conversation in the room, and what they're getting will be completely different from what somebody else got, because it's different people in the room. So that idea of curating that conversation and building connection in the room is something I kind of bring into the way that I do speaking as well. And it's not for everyone, but it's me playing to my strengths.
I think that's going to be very helpful for a lot of people to hear, because I hear about people wanting to begin to do speaking, but they approach it in a very lackluster way. I think if you are somebody who identifies as speaking as one of these things that you're going to really focus on, you need to really focus on it. You need to really make it a thing. Hang out with other speakers, get to know other speakers, get to know people who run organizations, be of service, most importantly. And then what goes around comes around, in simple terms. But I guess you need to wrap a process around this. And I think as a productivity ninja, I'm quite sure you'll have processes and documentation around tracking and monitoring and making sure you stay on top of it in such a way that it doesn't become overwhelming or the wheels fall off.
Yeah, and I think it's that's a really good point. So when I was building my business, a lot of what I learned about processes was about automation. It was about lists and autoresponders and things like that. And that's great when you're working with volume. For me, what I tend to find with speaking in particular, it's about the personal touch. So having processes in place that remind me it's been 2 weeks, it's now time to follow up is useful. Having something that just goes out saying, hey, trying to be personal, but actually it's automated, that doesn't work. And, I've been on the receiving end of other people's automations. In fact, I had one over Christmas. Like, I was off for 2 weeks over Christmas. My autoresponder was on telling you that I was off. And I had this day after day after day of like, hey, just checking in, and all of the kind of, the ways that people write those. And I was just like, there is no way I'm working with you, whatever you're offering, because that there's just there's no alignment there.
I think that's a really important thing for people to hear, because we are in an industry where everybody's talking about AI and automation, and there are a lot of people who make a lot of money telling us that this is the way, when actually really taking the time to pay attention to somebody, build a relationship, build the like, know, and trust very authentically, very genuinely. It's almost like, in Italy, that's where I think this slow food movement was born. It seems to be the higher profile is not the way to approach this. The more genuinely successful somebody is at what they do, it's proper attention to detail and relationships that tends to drive that. I think a lot of the time I talk to clients about the 4 doors of opportunity. There's our content and our content marketing. There's ads, there's outbound sales activity, and then there's our relationships and network. And in almost every case, it doesn't matter who you speak to, whether it's Pat Flynn, Jeff Bezos, or Barney down the road, the relationships that change the opportunities that change the game almost always come through relationships. All those other things matter, but relationships really need to sit at the heart of, and intentional, genuine relationships.
Yeah. So, what I do with my systems is I have my systems support that. So, I do have a calendar link, for example, and that is that's to make it easy for people to book in that conversation with me. And then the conversation is the bit where it's the personal touch. I've got a CRM system that helps me to keep track of who I've worked with, who I haven't spoken to for a while, and things like that, just to remind me. So it does the job of remembering. So I'm not carrying that bit around in my head. But what I say to them is going to be the thing that comes from me, because that's where the thought matters.
Which CRM do you use?
I've only just fairly recently actually started using Pipedrive. Yes.
I've seen people love Pipedrive. It's very cool.
Yeah. So I use that specifically for the speaking part of my business.
Yeah. So let's slide into part 2. And I have invited guest more recently, for the listener who's maybe not a regular listener. Part 2 is where I invite the guest to share 3 things. So mental model, hack, tool, tactic, a website they love, an app, a book, doesn't matter. But 3 things people can go and take action on in some way today. So Grace, what's thing number 1?
Thing number 1 I'm going to give you is my 3 shifts model to approaching struggle. And so shift number 1, and I call them shifts. And this started out, I feel like I need to kind of give a little bit of background here. This started out as one particular keynote that I did, where 5 minutes before going on stage, they said, "Hey, Grace, we have children in the audience. So if you can keep the language clean, that'd be great." I'm like, you have seen the title of the book, right? And so in those 5 minutes, instead of talking about shittier moments, I started talking about shiftier moments, which actually still works really well, because what it's talking about is navigating change, challenge. So instead of 3 shits, it became 3 shifts. So shift 1 is O shift. O shift is about just recognizing. It's not about how do I fix this, how do I get away from it. Like, recognize, face, what's the problem here, and it's facing like, what's the thing that's just happened? How does it make me feel? Recognizing the fear that's going on inside me, or the pain, and allowing yourself to acknowledge that. And this comes from someone who is, I'm always looking for the bright side. I am always an optimist. I always look for the positives. And for me, this is about recognizing, yes, the positives will come, but if you jump straight to the positives, you miss a whole load of stuff. So it is really important just to recognize this hurts, or this has gone wrong. So recognize the shift. Shift 2 is, what is this shift? Which is where we apply curiosity, where we go, okay, this is, this might be a problem, an obstacle, it might be a complete mess, and what else is going on here? So it's where we look at the thing with a lens of curiosity rather than a lens of fear. And as I mentioned earlier, fear will say danger, stay away. Curiosity says, that's interesting, let's take a closer look. And I talk about this often as a bit like, we talk about seeing light at the end of the tunnel as a sign of hope, right? But what if we can shine a light in the middle of the tunnel? What might we see instead? Maybe there's some work to be done, in the tunnel. Yeah. And so I think that's about not rushing to get through the tunnel, but actually paying attention. What's really going on here?
So what's the third shift?
So the third shift then is holy shift. That is the revelation, or the discovery, or the learning that comes from going through this process, that comes from acknowledging the difficulty and the challenge, and then applying curiosity. So, for example, one of the examples I've already given, like, holy shift, the thing that I thought my imposter syndrome thought disqualified me from being, an expert in productivity, or niching in productivity, that actually has become my edge. I couldn't have planned that, couldn't have known that. But it was applying that curiosity and going, well, let's try and answer this question. What can I give here? That's what led me to that discovery. There's all sorts of, sometimes your holy shift is an innovation that comes from, that setback, or that failure, or that mistake. We find something new, we discover something new. Sometimes the holy shift is, I'm not on my own. Like, there are other people, and because I was I was willing to be vulnerable with my struggle, I've actually connected with other people. One of the things I talk about in the book is what makes me weak makes us stronger. And actually, rather than subscribe to that sense of single-handed success, what if actually we're stronger together? When we find that we have a gap and we reach out for help, actually, as a community or as a partnership, we are stronger together.
I really like this framework because I think a lot of the time when we experience something that triggers a fear response, and there are many things in business that cause us to pull our horns in like a snail. This gives us a slightly different approach, which is far more productive. It allows us to reframe things and, as you identified, innovate. Innovation comes through struggle. It comes through properly addressing, and whether that's emotional innovation or business innovation, it's the same principle, the same practice. So that's really useful, and I'm going to spend a bit of time with that. So, thing number 2.
Thing number 2, you could call me out if you think I'm repeating myself, but something that I find really helpful within this process is a phrase that I talk about in Struggle, and I talk about how irritants are catalysts. So that we often, when we think of innovation, we see the end result and we go, oh, that's genius. But actually, in the moment, it feels a lot like irritation. And one of my friends is a chemist, and I remember we had this conversation. She said to me, just remember, Grace, catalysts are irritants. Like they work, they change things because they irritate. And I found this really helpful in the moment when I find myself irritated by something or someone. Irritants are catalysts.
I really like that. I mean, it does sit alongside the 3 shifts, but it is so specific in terms of if you find yourself irritated, that's actually an opportunity a lot of the time. I like that. And so behind door number 3.
So this is, again, it's related, but this is an area that I am digging into a lot more myself as well. I call it high functioning fear. So this is the conversation that I'm starting to have in a podcast that I'm putting together. It's kind of the extension of the work that I've been doing with Struggle. And it's about recognizing fear when it doesn't show up necessarily as panic or in the kind of conventional ways of fear. It shows up high functioning, which means that we might not spot it. We might see it as being really strategic or productive, or high performing. But actually, if fear is driving us, it will by definition have a narrowing effect. So it might narrow your perspective or your vision. It might be blocking you or blinding you or blinkering you. So let me give you some examples of what high functioning fear might look like. So there are 4 different responses, fear responses. So if you talk to a trauma specialist, if you talk to a therapist, they'll talk about fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. So high functioning fight might look like, I just need to work harder. I'm not gonna let fear stop me. I'm gonna work really hard. I'm gonna hustle on harder. And it could look like perfectionism. It could look like I never take a break. It could look like I have to control everything, or I'm holding on to everything. I can't delegate to anyone. It can look like defensiveness. So where actually everyone who disagrees with me starts to become opponents, and every deviation from the plan is a liability. It frames everything in a particular way. And I often say, sometimes that kind of fight energy can be useful. If you need to hit a deadline, high functioning fight can be helpful. But if you're trying to build bridges, or if you're trying to bring a team together, or even if you're trying to envision, that same fight energy is going to give you really narrow vision, and you can't see the wood for the trees. So so that's high functioning fight. High functioning flight, that is avoidance, but it might not look like I'm just procrastinating. It might feel strategic. It might look like, oh no, that's not for me. I am concentrating on this. I'm being focused. I'm simplifying. Bob told me to simplify, so I am simplifying. And we can talk our way into some of those things. And the key here isn't that it's wrong. It's just recognizing, if that's my go-to, when is it getting in my way? When is it actually stopping me from from the aspirations that I do have? Freeze, it can look a lot like busyness. So it's not necessarily nothing's happening. It's not paralysis. It's more, it can be, do you know what? I'm so busy dealing with all the stuff that feels safe. I haven't got time to deal with that thing that feels like a struggle.
I see that one all the time.
Yeah, exactly. And again, because it's high functioning, we don't necessarily see that as a fear response.
It's very easy to see it as a virtue. It's very easy to frame that as a virtue.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, I'm not going into analysis paralysis. I'm getting loads done. I'm taking action. But actually, is that action just taking you around in circles? And then the fourth one is fawn. So if you imagine an animal in the wild turning around to its predator and saying, please don't eat me, I'll be your friend. That's the fawn response. So this is your people pleasing, being too accommodating, saying yes to things that you probably should have said no to, or saying a fake yes. I'm saying yes to your face and no to your back, and things like that. And again, it's like I'm a natural people pleaser, and there is a strength to that, in that it makes me really conscious of, it's what helps me to be empathetic. It's what helps me to connect. It's, I do a lot of the things I do really well because I think a lot about what other people think. But it can also be the thing, if I'm in people pleasing mode and fear is driving me, it's like, I can't possibly say that. I can't possibly do something different. I've got to fit in. Or I'm not going to set boundaries because I might upset someone. So again, once we recognize this as fear, then we can make some decisions about, is this serving me? Or is there another way of looking at this? And can we stand down our fear? Because these, our instinctive fear response was designed to be a survival mechanism, but what keeps us alive might also be keeping us blinkered or blind or stuck.
It's really interesting listening to across the board. The one thing that really shines through is that productivity, yes, it's about systems. Yes, it's about processes. But actually, it's much more about the choices we make and the responses that we have to the things that arise, and how we choose to move through our day, and how we perhaps make conscious things that were previously unconscious. And it reinforces something that I've been very aware of, that across the board, whenever I meet extremely successful people, they're people who have grown. They're people who have embraced growth, and that the simple fact is that your business will only grow when you grow.
Yeah.
And finding frameworks and processes that support your growth are just as important as the processes and frameworks that you use for running your day on a very practical project and task basis.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think, part of that rhythm as well is making sure you have that space for reflection and growth. And that's where we come back to productivity isn't just about getting stuff done. It's like, do you have whatever that looks like? For some people, it's a weekly review. For some people, it's, I actually need somebody asking me those questions. So it might be the appointment with the coach. It might be time away. One of my business buddies, she talks about having business adventures, where it's like, I'm going to book a week in Barcelona, and that's going to be part of my business rhythm. And that might be where I do some strategic thinking, or it might be where I have a retreat. And you see this in large organizations. There are team away days, there are retreats, there are kickoffs. We can build that into our business as well, and see that as a legitimate business activity, not a luxury or a jolly.
This has been a lot of fun, Grace. We're going to have to do it again. I could probably one of the nice things about a conversation like this is it allows me to think, well, what would I really like to talk about? Because I have many more questions that could come out of this, but it'd become an incredibly long podcast. If somebody at home is thinking, you know what, I need some more Grace Marshall in my life, how can they make that happen?
So gracemarshall.com is where you can find me. You can grab a sample chapter of the book, of two of the books, so of Struggle and of How to Be Really Productive, from the website. But you can also sign up to my newsletter there to keep in touch. So I will send out occasional doses of work-life encouragement. So if you could do with that coming into your inbox, then pop your details in there and we can keep in touch that way.
Well, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks so much for having me.
So that brings us to the end of another episode. If you have enjoyed this episode and the chat with Grace, then you will love all the other episodes, so you should probably subscribe. So take a breath, take a moment to do that now. I'll wait. I won't wait. If you did enjoy this, then you will love the Personal Brand Business Roadmap. It's 50 pages of everything you need to start, scale, or fix your expert business. Hit the link in the show notes or visit amplifyme.agency/roadmap. For you home listening, thank you very much for making time, and Grace, thank you.
Absolute pleasure.